If you really want my personal opinion, I'm not quite sure what to make of these designs. Because in terms of the worst to best liveries for this season, it's just mostly a collection of reskins from last year. And for those of you curious to know my immediate thoughts of the McLaren livery for this year, no! Yeah, that pretty much sums up half of the liveries at least. Anyway, I don't want to beat about the bush, and here are my worst to best liveries, starting with Ferrari? Are you serious, Law? How dare you? How could you possibly put Ferrari last? Yes, I understand your frustration and your surprise and your anger, but I've just got one word for you, my friend, that I think deep down you understand and you can relate to. Sponsor clutter. Yes, I know that's 2 words actually, but I'm doubly dejected because these sponsors, including HP, have ruined an otherwise gorgeous shade of Ferrari red, and I also have to squint to try and find the Ferrari logos. They're just lost. And also, why didn't HP decide to use their modern HP design, the slash mark they use on laptops? If they had incorporated that in a way that was quite subtle, like the barcode Marlboro logo we had in the late 2000s, according to this user on social media, that would have been a much more sophisticated design and maybe better received. It would have been in keeping with Ferrari's heritage, but this? No. It's just the team wanting to make clear that they have a lot of money, and it's just wrong. Now, okay, I would like to point out first and foremost by starting off with Ferrari as the worst livery of 2025, at least at the moment, is that what we got is not really in keeping with the overall sense and perception that Ferrari would like you to have, as them being elegant, sophisticated, classy, relying on the cars themselves to do the talking, and that particular shade of red. I loved the shade that they used, and I recall last year too saying that I was a little bit concerned about the sponsor placements. They were a little distracting, but what made up for it was the fact that to begin with, they had the yellow and white stripes, and then the black wings with the Ferrari logo on it, in allusion to their success in Le Mans the previous year. And now, instead of seeing them unified, the WEC and F1 teams, they are now diverging, with the WEC car putting even more yellow on the car, and now the F1 car having no yellow at all. It's been replaced with more sponsors. It feels completely at odds with the history of Ferrari. And in my honest opinion, it just feels like the team is now bowing down to the money coming from Silicon Valley, from not just HP and the blue ball we're having to deal with, but we also have to deal with the fact we've got the blue of IBM on the back of the rear wing facing everyone else. So it's just right there. Yes, again, the shade of red that they are using is very luscious and juicy, and might be an allusion to the fact that I think after many decades, Philip Morris is no longer connected with Ferrari at all. I think they announced the end of their sponsorship, so maybe that might explain why they're using a slightly different shade of red. That's all been lost with all of these decals all over the place, just completely detracting from the fact that we have got this lovely colour of red. It is really a major disappointment, which I think is making an even louder stink online than Red Bull just pressing Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V for the nth time or something. And honestly, I think the furore against Ferrari would have been even louder had last night not been celebrating Enzo Ferrari's birthday, as well as Lewis Hamilton being there in Ferrari red, with the race suits, which do look pretty good, they look quite solid, and him beaming to the crowd, him really just taking it in that he's representing Ferrari. And I know you might be saying, well, it doesn't matter what the car looks like so long as it's fast, and that is absolutely true. But this is really meant to be Lewis Hamilton's first Ferrari, and this honestly is not screaming Ferrari as much as it should. And I know that some of you historians out there are going to be saying, well, this isn't the first time that Ferrari's had white on the engine cover. I agree with you. I recall the 1993 Ferrari with that awkward white stripe for some reason. I'm not quite sure it was there, but now I'm getting flashbacks to that early 90s design and how random it was. I just fear that HP is being creatively suffocating, and they insisted on that white stripe on the engine cover to match what they've got on the wings to make their logo stand out even more. Look, I don't think it's a terrible livery. There are no truly awful designs this year. And it just feels like the magic of Ferrari is being drowned out by sponsors in a way which isn't clean and in keeping with the overall ethos of the legendary car company. But then again, if it's quick and it can give either Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton a world championship, then hey, what does it matter? And then, yes, I get it. Putting the Red Bull design above Ferrari is something that might be seen as sacrilege. especially since that basic design has been locked in almost a decade ago. It is, though, a classic format, but what is really galling is that Max Verstappen teased to us all that the livery was supposedly going to be different and that he was satisfied with what he had seen, not seeing the same thing yet again. We were instead fed a bunch of lies, and the image of Red Bull Rot, which is meant to be Red Bull Red, no, we literally have Red Bull Rot, because this design is rotting away into something which is just completely derivative and just not really inspiring at all, save for the fact that we've got a different crypto company on the rear wing. But hey, at least we've got the Red Bull back on the front wing, I suppose. But I think the team was fully aware that the team boss's stability and continuity ethos for everything these days doesn't really translate well to a glitzy show that we got for F1 75 Live last night. Whilst their time slot was a cool nod to car culture, their VT package, and it was neat to see Liam Lawson start it all off since he is a major modding enthusiast, and if I ever do get the privilege to meet Liam Lawson in public, I would just love for him to just shout out, "Is that a Supra?" But you got the sense that the team knew that people were not going to like this car for the fact that it was just yet another example of the same basic design. And it was really evident that Christian Horner and Red Bull and Max Verstappen were not well received in London at all. The boos were absolutely deafening, and a topic for another video is that they essentially relied on the video package. They quickly wheeled out the car with some people behind them. Max and Liam didn't say anything. They didn't even have a microphone. They just say, "Here's the car," and then they ran for their lives, basically. But I will give it one thing. At least the sponsorship placement, albeit incredibly boring and conservative and uninspiring, it's cleaner than what Ferrari came up with this year. And then, as much as it pains me to say it, McLaren are 8th. McLaren only squeak above Red Bull and Ferrari for the fact that I do dig the papaya on black, and the placement of the colour does allude to the classic Marlboro liveries of their former glories. And not to mention for the fact they got it right next to all of their other classic cars on the night. The only difference being that it's not white and red for obvious reasons, because, you know, not the sponsors or anything like that. And not to mention for the fact that McLaren are now the only Formula 1 team that doesn't have a title sponsor that dictates whether or not they have to have the car a certain shade. They can keep it black and papaya, because that's what McLaren wants to do right now. And sure, Google are right there with Chrome, but they're not being nearly as draconian, save for the colourful wheel rim, you know, but otherwise that's cute and we barely see it anyway. So I can't be too harsh with the McLaren design, and it's only the second time that we've seen it, and at least they've not got that awkward shade of blue. Although there are some elements of blue with the likes of DP World there and Allwyn, but these are two different shades of blue, I think, and I do know that dark blue is very much an allusion to the early McLaren designs of the 70s and whatnot, especially with Can-Am and IndyCar. But either way, I think it could have been more subtly done with a darker blue that was been a discreet mark or anything. But the point is, though, is that this is a copy of last year's design, which I thought was okay. There were better designs last year. It's decent, it's in keeping, but other than that, that's basically it. It's going against the ethos they're having of never stop racing and having an extreme outlook for 2025. Well, they're not being extreme with the design, they're just copying what they did last year. And they're even aware of that. They're saying, "Oh, well, we don't need to change this is fine. We're focusing on other more important things." And yes, like I said with Ferrari, it doesn't really matter so long as the car is incredibly fast. So that is something to really to consider. But either way, it's just something I'm a little bit sad that we didn't get anything new, especially since it was right at the end of the show, and I was expecting an absolute barnstorm, or just at least an inversion, so we got the papaya with the black walls and vice versa. But hey, I'll give them their due. Because of the fact they have access to pretty much every single car they ever made, McLaren, they actually presented some of their classic cars that won Constructors' Championship, and I'm pretty sure that Lewis Hamilton would have been really pleased to see his first championship winning car from 2008 there. Then in 7th place, we've got the Haas 2025 car, and I'm a little bit mixed about this design. Whilst I appreciate the black Haas text on white with the side pod stuff, and the race suits and team kit are very slick and give me real OG Haas vibes with a mix of Toyota composition. And seriously, I am really waiting for the day that Denso and Panasonic become team sponsors of Haas to really allude to the fact that really this team is headed toward a Toyota Gazoo rebrand. The car itself was okay, but it sort of goes against what I was thinking the team principal was wanting to carve out at Haas, a brand new era of the team for himself, since he had a very impressive first year out as the team's lead after the departure of Gunther Steiner. This to me though feels instead like a conservative continuity, albeit inverting some of the colours. It's not a bad design, don't get me wrong, it's interesting, and it's not just pressing copy-paste like some of the other teams on this list, but it's not really screaming out to me Haas properly in a way, especially when you compare it to the video package that they had during their presentation about them screaming from the rooftops that they are America's Formula One team. It does seem very much at odds with this design, save for whatever they pull out for, say, Miami, Vegas, or Austin, where they will definitely amp up the Americana, that's for sure. But that was all for very much good reason, to really steal the thunder and get ahead for the arrival of Cadillac next year, who will definitely want to shout from the rooftops that they are America's Formula One team. So yeah, Haas is definitely getting in early, and I just don't feel like the current design is really reflecting that. It could change next year, of course, but this year, I feel like it's a smart tweak of what they had from last year, but it's mainly that. It was a tweak, but at least it was a noticeable tweak. It wasn't just a color palette or a sponsor change or anything like that. I just feel like it could have been a little bit more to really carve out Komatsu's arc with this team. You know, the man, not the heavy machinery company. Yeah, they could have taken this a little bit further, but hey, it's still pretty decent. Then I've got Sauber in 6th place. And you might be confused as to why I rate Sauber up here, since essentially the livery itself is, well, it looks like a starter livery or a design or something incredibly basic, because there's only a gradient from matte green to black, and that's it. And what really didn't help is that whatever they did with the template car that they were using for the event, it was not a clean fade from carbon fiber to grey or that gradient or whatever. But I'm pretty sure that the renders and the actual car, the 2025 one, will be a lot cleaner. But the point is, though, is that Sauber is going through a slight identity shift and realizing that, oh, we were really cringe last year. And I think this year they will be far more reserved with how they present themselves. We're not going to get the gamer mentality that we had in 2024, which instead of appearing to be cool and down with the kids, yeah, we're not going to be seeing any of that, because it just came off really, really forced. Because I'm pretty sure that Mattia Binotto and the soon-to-be-arriving Jonathan Wheatley have recalled what Bottas said, that period of his career was a mistake to take part in and remain with Sauber when they became Steak Kick Sauber or whatever. And this is meant to be their final year as Sauber, so at least it's got to look somewhat presentable, which I think it does. It looks smart and clean, and nothing like the gamer mode we saw last year. Albeit that being very striking, it was a little bit messy from certain angles, and also the steak labeling is far less pronounced, albeit still notable. Yes, that livery was eye-catching, but a little messy. But you get the sense the team is weaning itself off that brand since the results on track didn't reflect the attitude it tried to convey. And yes, I feel like it's trying to manifest a livery which is safer, but nice looking still, with the use of matte green into black. And I feel like it will look better, not to mention for the fact that I think that this is a kind of design that would really be in keeping with what Audi wants to convey from this team, because with every passing week we hear from Binotto about how the team sort of ground to a halt under Andreas Seidel and James Key, that they weren't quite sure what to do with this team. But now there seems to be more focus from Audi in what it wants from this team. I'm quite sure that this year, Audi does not want to be carrying off a team or investing in a team which appears to be, well, doing what they were doing last year. And yeah, I feel like that they're being a little bit more mature here. Then we've got in the midfield, the Williams FW47. Yes, this design is a little safe, and there isn't a hint of the camo livery we saw during the team's shakedown, but it's a little more uniform and in keeping with the team's history somewhat, what with the use of blue on their car. Albeit with some sponsor deference to Komatsu, because their blue element on the side pod is just that little bit different to the overall blue of the engine cover under Atlassian. That is unfortunate. But in all honesty, I wasn't really a big fan of the really awkward to see and dark glass motif they've had since 2022. I really remember the 2021 livery and that being quite stark. I thought we were going to be getting something like that, what they were doing with the team caps for this year. But either way, I feel like what we've got here was really underrated and not really highlighted during the event, because when you take a look at the renders or the photography that Williams produced on social media, this design, this gradient looks clean. It still retains the idea that Williams is a very smart looking car, albeit not bombastic, but I don't think that they care about that. It's not dramatic, but the team isn't seeking to be dramatic, as we've talked about in previous videos. It's all about communicating to us that the team is to be taken seriously once again. that there is one voice and no nonsense. And not to mention that they are in rude health because of the amount of sponsors that they got, which do carry a sense of legitimacy, and this isn't some kind of desperate way to grab a quick buck from any sponsor that would become a knock-in. Yes, it's not going to be a classic design over the years to come, it's not going to be remembered as one of the best designs, but I think that the fans of Williams will be looking at this design and giving it a knowing smile, that it's a sign that their team is now getting itself back together again, and that it's a very competent and mature looking design. Now, okay, Aston Martin's presentation with the allusions to James Bond's classic Thames motorboat chase from the world is not enough. That was pretty awesome. There's a bit of speculation about AI being used in mixed with the hand-drawn stuff, which is a little bit of a sour taste left in my mouth, but overall the package was decent, and Aston Martin used their time wisely. Not just in that package, but also on stage. Because I remember throughout that presentation, I was just like, yeah, ooh, yeah, that's very crisp, very suave. I remember being very taken in the moment, but now I've had time to process the car itself, the Aston car is starting to succumb, I think, to the issue that befell Ferrari and other teams. Sponsor clutter, which means I cannot rate it any higher than 4th. Had the sponsorship composition been cleaner, it would have been higher. And whilst I dig the increased use of the racing operations lime green accent alongside their traditional green, because now we've got lime green numbers to mix out with the swooshes, the black additions though on the side pod with Aramco are really taking more prominence on the car. It's just a little jarring, I think. As well as the white strip on the airbox for their new sponsor from the Middle East, John Madden. Don't get me wrong, it's a solid base and the sponsor clutter is less than other teams on this list, but it is creeping in there since Aston Martin have introduced a whole lot of sponsors for this year. It could have been a little bit more adventurous, but hey, a little less black and white and more lime green, that would have been all that was needed to make it perfect. But front on, oh, it is close to being perfect. And then we move on to the 3rd place entry, and that being the Alpine A525. Are you serious, Law? Alpine, the 3rd best livery of the grid? Hey. As I said at the beginning of this video, the overall lineup is relatively conservative with just repeats of what we got last year. At least the Alpine looks interesting and, most importantly, it has colour. They listened. We should be cheering for the fact that they listened, that they're in a position where they can have colour instead of just carbon fibre with some coloured stickers on it. It's clear that they've learnt their lesson after the debacle of last year, where over the year they slowly added more blue or pink as they shed weight from their car. At least what we've got right now for 2025 is kind of interesting to look at, and almost a nod back to the Alpine of 2022, albeit slightly more lurid. However, when you look at it in the renders and lighter hues, it is a little bit cleaner from what we saw on the night. There is a black outline between the blue and the pink, so it's not just bleeding into one another. I was a little bit worried on the night, to be honest, that was the case. But that being said, and something I do need to point out here, is that even though I do like this contrast in these renders and having had some time to process it, this is the least Alpine looking car to date. It's not even close to emulating the endurance team's efforts in this year's livery for the A424, which is definitely very French. Not quite as striking as last year's with that colour coding, but it's still nice. And even though I think the F1 livery is interesting, it's not particularly Gallic in design. Not even the Renault E-Tech branding on the airbox is there. And in fact, if you remove the A's from this image here, boom! You wouldn't even know that this was the Alpine team, save for the blue of the car. And even then you would have to be in the know that Alpine's signature colour is blue. Yes, I have been noticing this, that even the team race suits are starting to look a little more generic, and not really Alpine by design, but more in deference to the controls and colours and whims of BWT. There is one thing about French design I really like, is that the Alpine of 2023, with its little clusters around the engine cover, it looked really sophisticated. That's not there anymore, because this team is getting less and less French by the day. But hey, at the very least, this car at least stands out amongst all of the other designs. It's eye-catching, at least. But hey, by the way, interesting thought experiment, especially with my conspiracy theories regarding high-tech. If you take away that blue and change it to grey or silver, oh, high-tech, pink, silver, black, that's not looking too bad. Then, in second place, we have the Mercedes W16. Now, I liked the W15 livery the most out of all the designs from last year, so to see the team repeat the same thing for this year was nice, albeit a missed opportunity to maybe, well, signal an even bigger departure from the Lewis Hamilton era of their history. You might be thinking I'm being rather hypocritical here and favouring Mercedes, whereas I've really marked down other teams in the front-running pack that have essentially copied last year's design. But there is one thing that saved Mercedes from me marking them down significantly, and there is a real notable departure in terms of the colour, which sort of balances things out in a way, yet also makes it clear that Mercedes are bleeding sponsors, and that is the missing Toto Rosso, they cheekily say. Most notably, the Ineos red of one of their senior shareholding partners. Supposedly, Ineos is in major financial trouble and are cutting back on sporting sponsorships, with them no longer enforcing their red onto the car, and instead, they've got just a couple of stickers on the race suit and the front wing, and the airbox has gone silver. For this to be absolutely perfect and get the top spot, they probably should have referred to this era back to black, like the part underneath it. There's just this random stripe, which I feel like doesn't look quite right, but yes, it is a reminder that quite a few sponsors have departed the team, with Lewis leaving the team as well. I mean, it's still a good-looking design. I really like the combination of black and silver here, as well as the teal. Petronas, it all works. However, I'm a little bit concerned, and I'm yet to see it. I don't see Niki Lauda's red star anywhere. At least I've not seen it in the renders. Can anyone in the comments just point it out to me if it is there? Because it's not very obvious to see, and if it's not there, that would be a crying shame, and it would definitely make me feel like they are trying to move on from that era of their history, including dropping the Lauda connection. I mean, that would be absolutely egregious if they did that. So please, I will try and look for it more, but if anyone out there's already spotted it, please let me know on my socials, okay? In the pinned comment. But hey, I still like this design, and the race suits from Adidas, they've landed well with the fandom as well. But either way, you probably want to know what I think is the best looking design, and I think it's already safe to say it's the Racing Bulls design for this year, and yes, I was very sad that the green accent on the race suits wasn't on the car itself, but you know what? Hey, considering what we've seen up to now, whatever. At least Racing Bulls knows what it's supposed to be now in terms of identity. You know, instead of pretending to be Toro Rosso, which they weren't. And even though I liked it at the time when it was launched, over the course of the season, it just became clearer and clearer and clearer that Red Bull didn't really know what to do with this team in terms of overall appeal and design and composition. They didn't even know if they wanted to be a junior team or a second team. It was a real existential crisis for this team, but at least now they know what they want to be. And that is reflected in the V-Carb O2's design. This design, matching the race suits, is much more presentable and cohesive. The matte white with Red Bull motif, it's a nice nod and throwback to the Honda tribute livery of 2021. So it will be nice to see this for the whole year, as well as the Bulls making a blue cameo around the back of the car. That is very interesting. The blue matches the Visa logo too. And couple that with Yuki's white helmet for the year, it's a clean design. And a design which is interesting and novel. Even V-Carb's team kit is interesting, unlike the senior teams. And hey, even though their VT segment from the night was a little bit cringy, although I do like Munya Chihuahua, at least they are poking fun at themselves after the debacle of last year, where no one really was quite sure what their name actually was. Even they weren't entirely sure, and they were pretending that, oh no, the RB isn't Racing Bulls, even though on the FIA entry list it does say Racing Bulls. At least they are aware of that now. They can at least own it and then move on with their lives. That is something. They are Racing Bulls, and all in all, I get who they are now. Yes, they are the second Red Bull team, but at least we know they are, and they are doing so in their own way in terms of their overall design language, instead of relying on a throwback design which had its place 2 name changes ago. So there we are. Here's the 2025 lineup. I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't as striking as last year's, and if you would like to relive my instant reactions to those 2024 designs, you can watch this handy-dandy playlist right here and make yourself comfortable, and just remind us all that this year was a little bit of a dud in terms of an overall package.